Hello, you're watching Eye on Africa. I'm James Creedon. Here are our headlines from across the continent this evening. In Uganda, the home of opposition leader Bobi Wine has been stormed by the military. This after a day after the country went to the polls. We'll get the latest from our team in Kampala. And in the CAR, the number of refugees fleeing violence following last month's contested presidential election has doubled to 60,000 in just 1 week. That's according to the UN. We'll bring you more on that. And in West Africa, there was a record number of pirate kidnappings in the Gulf of Guinea last year. We'll get some analysis on that situation later on in the show. Thanks for watching. Now, it was a bitterly fought and bloody campaign in Uganda over the past few months. President Yoweri Museveni, in power since 1986, is seeking to extend his rule. And pop star turned politician Bobi Wine has been his main obstacle. Now, Ugandans voted on Thursday, and Museveni has taken an early lead with some 65% of ballots cast for him. This after a third of votes have been counted. Bobi Wine stands currently at just over 27% of the vote. Meanwhile, Wine says that the military have taken over his home. Now, a spokesman for the Ugandan military denies the reports, despite there being some pictures of military, at least around the perimeter of Bobi Wine's home. Now, Gronya Harrington has been following all the day's events for us in Kampala. She sent us this report a little earlier.
Bobi Wine had said that his house had been entered by armed men. So he said around 10 armed men with assault rifles entered the compound, some in uniform and some in plain clothes, that they'd taken the security guard and beaten him very badly, and that when Bobi Wine's wife filmed them doing this, a gun was pointed at her. So they'd already sent their children away, so they're now alone in the house. The children are in the United States. Bobi Wine says that's for their own safety. There's quite a heavy deployment on the road to the house, and Wine and his wife said they felt they were effectively under house arrest and that they feared for their lives. Earlier in the day, as you said, he'd called this election the worst case of rigging in Ugandan history. He used the phrase daylight robbery and accused soldiers of intimidating people and stuffing ballot boxes. The Electoral Commission has denied all these claims, but since there's been a complete internet blackout in Uganda since Wednesday evening, it's been very difficult to build a reliable picture, actually, of how the election went across the country. Results are due at 4 p.m. local time tomorrow, and the law says that they must be announced by that time. That's 48 hours after polling stations closed. And the Electoral Commission has said in their latest update in the past hour that they were on course for the results to come out on time. So, as we know, this has been a hugely violent election campaign, and there's been significant tension in the run-up to the vote. The President and the security services have repeatedly warned that any kind of unrest would be very firmly dealt with, and there is a big security presence around the capital in particular. We saw in November that when Bobi Wine was arrested, there were 2 days of riots, which led to the deaths of at least 54 people. And with President Museveni on course for a win already, the result won't be a surprise to many. So what happens tomorrow may depend on what happens to Bobi Wine and any reaction that comes from his supporters.
Now, to Central African Republic next, where some 60,000 people have fled the country since a coalition of rebel groups launched a series of attacks there. Now, those rebel groups are protesting the result of last month's presidential election. According to the UN, 50,000 civilians have crossed the Ubangi River into Democratic Republic of Congo. Peacekeepers, meanwhile, have blocked rebels who had been fighting in the capital, Bangui, on Wednesday. A Rwandan peacekeeper was killed in those clashes. The UN has called for an end to the bloodshed and for dialogue to resume. Shirley Sitbon has more.
These Central African families found refuge in Cameroon. They're part of the 60,000 civilians who have fled the violence that has been spreading in the Central African Republic since last month. The decision to leave came fast when they learned rebel fighters were approaching their hometowns.
Ils sont venus tout simplement envahir bois et attaquer, commencent à taper les armes lourdes. Vraiment, on avait eu un coup dur par rapport à l'arrivée de ces rebelles. Donc on a fui avec mon mari, on était venus ici à Babouak, croyant que peut-être on pouvait avoir aussi la paix.
The violence started last month before the presidential election, won by President Faustin Archange Touadéra. 6 of the country's most powerful armed groups, who say the election was rigged, united in a coalition and started a violent offensive. On Wednesday, they attacked the capital. On these images, UN peacekeepers head towards the fighting in Bangui to stop the rebels, while civilians walk the opposite direction, fleeing the city.
Par la vigueur et la robustesse et la détermination de nos troupes, c'est ici exactement que les premiers éléments ont pu être arrêtés et donc on a pu contenir.
Concerned by the ongoing violence and the flow of refugees, the UN has called to end the fighting and urged political factions to resume dialogue.
All right, time now for some other news in brief from across the continent. 46 pygmies have been killed in eastern DR Congo's Ituri province by the notorious ADF militia. ADF has been accused of hundreds of killings in the past year in North Kivu and southern Ituri provinces. This in reprisal for an army offensive launched in late 2019. The UN said one of its peacekeepers died when a convoy travelling through northern Mali hit a makeshift roadside bomb. Now that brings to 5 the number of UN troops killed in just 3 days in the jihadist hit West African country. Meanwhile, the French army announced that they had killed around 15 jihadists near Mali's border with Burkina Faso. South Africa's ex-president Jacob Zuma will not appear before a judicial panel probing alleged graft during his time in office, this according to his lawyer. A court application does appear to compel Zuma to testify, but he has consistently been evasive with the commission since it was set up in 2018 to investigate looting of state coffers. Now, pirates in the West African region kidnapped 130 seafarers in 22 separate incidents last year. That makes the Gulf of Guinea the worst affected area in the world when it comes to piracy. Now, earlier on, I spoke with Michael Howlett, director of the International Maritime Bureau, that has just released a report on the issue. Let's take a listen.
This is the highest number that we've ever recorded. The furthest kidnapping took place almost 200 nautical miles from the coast. And in this one incident alone, 13 crew were kidnapped. The average distance of these kidnappings is occurring 60 nautical miles from land. And all types of ships are being attacked. And on average, 1 in every 4 vessels that is attacked, crew are being kidnapped in those incidents.
Can you explain why the problem is becoming more severe? And it appears as well that these pirates are more equipped. They're able to be more ambitious in their piracy. It's going further out from the coast. Why this deepening or worsening of the situation?
Well, Gulf of Guinea piracy has always existed, and it's been overshadowed in many ways by Somali piracy. But the Gulf of Guinea piracy that we see today has become very much commercialised. It's much more commercialised in nature, and the risk-reward ratio is very much in the pirates' favour. Over the last 18 months, our Piracy Reporting Centre, we observed an increased number of attacks at much greater distances from the shore. And what this illustrates is that these are organised attacks. They have an operational range and capability, and that this is organised crime. And the way it's leading at the moment has prompted our Piracy Reporting Centre to advise vessels to now stay at least 250 nautical miles from the coastline until it's safe to actually go in and discharge the cargoes.
Now, what are the consequences for communities along the coast? Is this impacting on communities, or is it more on maritime companies, etc.? Nigeria, from what I understand, is particularly impacted.
Well, it will impact all economies in the region, and it does require a regional response. And if this is left unchecked, it's not just the innocent crew and their families, but those coastal states and the growth that is potentially lost in those economies. And that's why we're calling for, a more robust response to this crime.
OK, and just one last question briefly, a very simple and obvious question. What can be done to solve this problem in the Gulf of Guinea?
Yeah, that's that's not the simple question. Prevention is better than cure, and the ships do have a role to play in this. Early detection of a suspect approaching craft, that can give valuable time to avoid a boarding. And this is not just applicable in the Gulf of Guinea, but for piracy incidents globally. It allows the crew to ask for help, but also it allows them to muster in a safe room or a citadel in the event that they are boarded.
All right, now it's a story that got a lot of coverage in the media here in France. A baker launched a campaign to prevent his apprentice from being deported. Now, Stéphane Ravaclé was told that he would have to return to his native Guinea despite wishing to continue his apprenticeship and stay in France. He has now been granted a French residency. This report by our colleagues at France 3.
For 10 days, this baker ate nothing but broth, protesting against the planned deportation of his Guinean apprentice. A fight that ended in victory. Laifoudé Traoré, who arrived in the country as an unaccompanied minor in 2019, has been granted French residency.
Quand j'ai compris que l'ail était sauvé, c'est un des grands soulagements de ma vie, quoi, véritablement.
J'étais heureux, ému, parce qu'on me dit que je vais quitter dans le territoire et on me dit aussi que je pourrais rester sur le territoire aussi. J'étais heureux, rien que ça.
Lai has been working in this bakery for over a year, but after he turned 18, he was informed he faced being sent back to his homeland before completing his training. Thanks to his employer's hunger strike and to an online petition, the young Guinean will resume work on Tuesday, while his boss already plans to fight for the others. Stéphane Ravaclé wants to work with MPs on a bill that would help young migrants stay in France until they graduate.
Okay, that brings us to the end of this edition of Eye on Africa. It was produced by Amaya yet again. Thank you to her and all the team, and thank you for watching. Good night.